If you're interested in a story, please go read the novel. The movie adaptation has had significant changes to the plot, such as removing major characters and changing character arcs for the worse. This comic claims that this story was trying to show a world where people weren't interested in literature, even if it existed. But if you read it, you'll learn that there were in fact banned books. The reason they're banned is because they interfere with the current world's condition. I can understand why history and the high arts had to be censored, because just reading about the past would have conditioned the world. Most people who talk about Brave New World completely miss the point. They focus on the soma, which is a recreational drug that the world uses, and the idea that people wouldn't be interested in learning history. The main point of the story is the conditioning, and everything else comes secondary to it. In this video, I'll be analyzing the book chapter by chapter, so I can break it down for everyone. Too many people are missing the forest full of trees. These chapters follow the director, who is showing students around the creation and conditioning of embryos from eggs to children, so keep this in mind when you're reading the summary. This chapter gives exposition on how reproduction is in the society. Natural reproduction is possible, but is frowned upon, and instead, humans are created artificially. The supervisor is even called the director of hatcheries and conditioning. Hatcheries are a term used for breeding and rearing livestock animals, but in this brave new world, humans have been reduced to mere tools of the state, created in laboratories and then raised without parents to be conditioned, as the name implies, to fill certain tasks. This is when you're introduced to the caste system: alpha, beta, gamma, delta, and epsilon in descending order from top of the hierarchy to the bottom. Gammas, deltas, and epsilons are claimed to be the manual laborers of the world. Within the caste system, there are tiers within them, so there are alpha plus and alpha minus, so on and so forth. Through a process called Bolensky process, they're able to get 96 identical twins from the same ovary and sperm cell. People's entire lives are determined at the hatchery, at the stage of being an egg, and sent to a social predestination room. There's even job positions called predestinators. Embryos are purposely given less oxygen so that they will develop into dumb or being workers to keep them, as the director puts it, below par. The brain was affected first, then the skeleton. The lower the caste, the lower oxygen. They figured that at 70% oxygen they got dwarves, and below that they got eyeless monsters. The lowest caste, epsilons, did not need human intelligence, and the director wishes a way of speeding up physical development so that epsilons could do physical labor sooner to produce for the community. The conditioning involves exposing embryos to hot and cold temperatures to produce humans that will love or hate certain temperatures so that they will love their jobs. Conditioning is about making people love their unescapable social destiny. Chapter 2. This chapter focuses on the conditioning of infants in the nursery. A group of Delta babies are given the chance to play on the floor with books and flowers. They enjoy the experience, making squeals of excitement, gurgles, and twitterings, as the book describes, before being terrorized by first a siren that causes them to shriek in terror, and then given a mild electric shock. They shriek away in terror. Repeating the process 200 times will give the babies instinctive hatred of books and flowers, or their lives. The hatred of books is necessary to make Deltas hate reading, but the reasons for instilling the hatred of nature was purely for economic reasons. Deltas loving nature does mean transport is consumed, but it means people won't consume manufactured goods. The love of nature was replaced with sports, so that the Deltas would consume sports merchandise. We learn that Polish, French, and German are dead languages. Since people are no longer born, no one is a parent anymore, and the word is seen as smut. The words mother and father were also seen as smut. Parenthood was seen as an unpleasant historical fact. A child named little Reuben was found to repeat the words of a radio transmission word for word that he heard while he was sleeping. This was how this world discovered sleep teaching, or hypnopedia. Hypnopedia was found to be useless for intellectual education, but very useful for moral education. A loudspeaker trumpets the words silent, silence, and everyone automatically rises to tiptoes, even the highest caste. The alphas are also conditioned. Children are subject to elemental class consciousness hypnopedia. They are conditioned to believe that alpha children were grey, betas were maroon or mulberry, gammas were green, deltas were khaki, and epsilons were black, the color of beasts. For the class that the reader sees, which is implied to be one for beta children, the loudspeaker teaches them to appreciate their status in society, being below alphas, so they don't have to work as hard, not to play with castes below them, and how to identify other castes by their clothing. In this chapter, we're introduced to the religion of Fordism, the worship of Henry Ford. Chapter 3. The chapter starts off with hundreds of naked children playing around in apparatus, with the director remarking on the folly of children not requiring many manufactured goods to play in Henry Ford's day. The world controllers won't approve of a new game that doesn't simulate economic activity. The director explains that sexual play between children was seen as abnormal and immoral, to the laughter and astonishment of the students with him. It's unbelievable to them that most people weren't exposed to sexuality till they were 20 years old. A student was shocked and asked what the consequences of that was. The question is answered by the world controller, Mustafa Mond, simply saying that the result of such a system were terrible. Mond is described as being black-haired, middle height, with a hooked nose, full red lips, and piercing dark eyes. The director refers to him as his Fordship, like how he would say his lordship. There are 10 world controllers in total. We hear that there are rumors surrounding Mond about owning forbidden books. The director thinks that only 4 knows what he really owned. Mond asks the group to try and imagine what it's like to have a normal family, being born naturally and living with them in a home. Everyone shook their heads. Mond talks about how the world used to be full of brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, fathers, and mothers, leading to misery, sadism, chastity, madness, and suicide. In the savage reservations or in Samala, people still live naturally. There was exclusivity with monogamy and romance. We're introduced to the hypnotic proverb, everyone belongs to everyone else, and after 62,000 repetitions, people accept it as true, axiomatic, self-evident, and utterly indisputable. At this point, the story shifts back and forth between the perspective of Lenina Crown and Fanny Crown, and Mond and the group. The Crowns have no relation, there's just a lack of unique names amongst them in the place. Lenina is being lectured for only being with Henry Foster for 4 months. At 35 or 40, it would be acceptable, but it's seen as taboo at her current age. Although there is no need for natural reproduction, people are still encouraged to enjoy themselves and sleep around. Lenina mentions that she was asked out by Bernard Marx to see the Savage Reservation with him. She thinks to herself that his demeanor is that of a Gamma minus, despite being an Alpha plus. Mond asks the group whether they have ever had to wait for their desires to be fulfilled. One of the boys answered that he had to wait 4 weeks until he could sleep with the girl he wanted. Mond and the boy say that it was horrible that he had to wait for sex. Bernard, who is part of the group, silently gnaws his teeth at the objectification of Lenina like meat. We cut back to a conversation between Lenina and Fanny. Fanny states that Bernard is ugly, but Lenina comments that Bernard is cute like a cat, and that she would like to pet him. Fanny gossips about Bernard's sudden growth being as a result of someone making a mistake, and adding alcohol to his blood surrogate, thinking he was destined to be a Gamma. Lenina thinks it's nonsense and says that she's going to accept his invitation. We hear that hypnopedia was prohibited in England as a result of classical liberalism. Again, we hear, everyone belongs to everyone. Bernard is a specialist in hypnopedia and thinks 100 repetitions 3 nights a week for 4 years makes one truth. Then that anyone who believes that are idiots. He hated them but didn't do anything, as Henry Foster, one of the Alpha Pluses with the group, and Mond were 2 and stronger than him. Mond goes into a diatribe about history with the 9 Years' War, the Great Economic Collapse, the death of liberalism, the conscription of consumption, the emergence of simple lifers who wanted to go back to nature on a normal scale, and then 800 of the number were mowed down by machine guns at Golders Green, the famous British Museum massacre where 2,000 culture fans were gassed and then the violence stopped when the world controllers realized they couldn't use force. Instead, hypnopedia, conditioning, propaganda, and book burning were used to change the population and erase the past. History before 150 AF, presumably after Ford, was erased. Christianity was replaced with Fordism, with crosses having their tops cut to resemble T's. Underconsumption was seen as a virtue in the past when there was underproduction, but now was seen as a sin. And Ford's Day celebrations, instead of presumably religious holidays, took their place. Sometime after, Soma, the happy drug, is invented. Bernard thinks himself how he hates Henry and how even Lena thinks of herself as meat. The assistant predestinator points at Bernard, saying that he looks glum. Henry suggests that Bernard takes Soma. Bernard thinks that he would like to kill Henry, but rejects the Soma. Henry insists, and the assistant predestinator cites some hypnopedia, saying 1 cubic centimeter cures 10 gloomy sentiments. Bernard responds by shouting, "Damn you, damn you." Someone says, "A gram is better than damn," before going out laughing. Bernard thinks that they're idiots and swears himself before leaving. Chapter 4. Lenina gets into a lift with a group of Alpha Plus males. She had spent a night with almost all of them. She notices Bernard in the corner and begins to discuss with him a trip to New Mexico. Bernard is embarrassed, and Lenina thinks he reacted as if she told a dirty joke. They're interrupted by the shouts of a small Sumerian creature, and Ibbelson Minus, who's the liftman, that shouts, "Roof." The group steps onto the roof, and Lenina tells Bernard that she has to go to Henry, and leaves for the hangars to fly off in a helicopter with him. Benito, one of the Alpha Pluses, says that Bernard looks glum and that he should take some Soma. Bernard leaves. Lenina repeats her hypnopathic condition. What a hideous color khaki is. Bernard is insecure, having feared rejection from Lenina. He orders Delta Minus attendance in the tone of an arrogant man insecure in his own skin. Dealing with lower castes always reminds himself of his short stature, as he's also slender in comparison to his peers. He was 8 centimeters shorter and hardly better than the average Gamma. Being on the same level, instead of looking down on Delta, felt humiliating to him. In this world, physique is associated with caste, unironically because of his own career in Hypnopedia. Hence, men and women mock him. Bernard feels like an outsider and is jealous of other Alpha Pluses, such as Benito and Henry, who don't suffer his physical defects. We're introduced to a new character that climbs onto Bernard's plane, Helmholtz Watson. Where Bernard has a deficit of development, Helmholtz has an excess. Unfortunately, I haven't found an adaptation with Helmholtz, and in the show they changed him to a woman as Wilhelma Helm Watson. But for all intents and purposes, he's basically a geek Chad, having both brain and brawn to get him all the women and respect he needs. So I'll use a Gigas Chad picture for him. I haven't seen the show, but for all intents and purposes, in the books, Helmholtz is basically Bernard's friend. While Bernard was physically deficient, Helmholtz had a mental excess. But Helmholtz had only recently realized I was different from everyone else. On the other hand, Bernard has always known he was different. Helmholtz was a ladies' man, having had 640 girls in under 4 years. Helmholtz complains of all the women that were pestering him up until he slammed the door of the plane, and Bernard, out of insecurity, casually boasts that he's taking Lena to New Mexico. Helmholtz doesn't care and replies he's cutting off all his harem and committees to spend time in solitude. He ponders about his extraordinary ability that is going to waste. He views his career as a lecturer at the College of Emotional Engineering meaningless. Bernard suddenly becomes suspicious that someone is listening in on them, and Helmholtz opens the door to reveal that Bernard was just being paranoid. Bernard cries over the fact that Helmholtz will never truly understand him. Lena and Henry finish golfing and head back in a helicopter, and they talk about how cremated corpses have a 98% prosperous recovery rate used for cremation. Henry states that all men are physiochemically equal, even Ippelsens, but Henry reminds her that if she won, she wouldn't mind her position because of her conditioning she would have received. They end up in a dining hall where they dance and take Soma, and then Lena takes contraceptives before sleeping with Henry. Bernard goes to solidarity service where he sit around a table and worship Henry Ford in a very cautious manner. Everyone takes Soma and have an orgy. Chapter 6. Lena thinks Bernard is odd and wonders if she should cancel the trip to New Mexico. As an Alpha Plus psychologist, Bernard is one of the few people able to get a permit to travel there to the Savage reservations. They both go on dates flying on a helicopter, and while Lena wants to be around crowds, Bernard hates them. He reluctantly goes to the Women's Heavyweight Wrestling Championship, but avoids talking to Lena's friends, who they meet dozens of there. Bernard tries talking to Lena about how he'd rather be himself and grumpy instead of someone else and happy, but all Lena can do is spout some hypnopedia phrases, to which Bernard shouts for her to be quiet. A gram in time saves 9. 1 cubic centimeter cures 10 gloomy sentiments. A gram is always better than a dam. Bernard hovers his helicopter above the English Channel and insists on watching the ocean currents in silence. Lena hates it and turns on the radio. Bernard turns it back off, saying he likes seeing the ocean in silence because he feels like an individual instead of a cell of a social body. Lena cries, saying it's horrible, and gasps at the idea of not wanting to be part of the social body, with everyone being useful, even Ippelsens. Bernard says he knows that and wishes he wasn't useful. Bernard complains that he doesn't have freedom since he's conditioned and wants to feel things in his own way, asking Lena if she would like to be free. Lena says she's already free to be happy, but Bernard says she's only happy in everyone else's way, not her own. Lena doesn't understand and shuts the conversation down by insisting Bernard takes Soma. They go back to their rooms, and Bernard takes Soma and says he didn't want to end the date. We were sleeping together despite having done it the day before. Lena replies, "Never put off tomorrow the fun you can have today." 200 repetitions, twice a week, from 14 to 16 and a half, replied. Bernard feels that when it comes to people, they act like adults during working hours, but when it comes to their true desires, they act like infants, doing exactly what they want. He wonders if people should be acting like adults constantly. The second scene of this chapter is Bernard going to the director so that his permit to his New Mexico trip is signed. The director has no choice but to sign since the world controller, Mond, has already stamped it. The director reminisces about how he'd gone there with a yellow-haired Beta Minus woman 20 years prior and lost her. He gets angry at himself for revealing his past and threatens sending Bernard to Iceland for acting improper outside of working hours. Bernard speaks of his meeting with the director with Helmholtz, and the latter likes Bernard for being able to confide in him, but hates him for his alternating moods of boasting and self-pity. Scene 3 is Bernard and Lena going to a hotel together, and the film warning that there won't be any modern conveniences in the Savage reservations, and she won't love it. "Progress is lovely, isn't it?" Lena says. 500 repetitions, once a week from 13 to 17, Bernard replies. They go to a reservation, and the warden tells them about the fence that gives you instant death if you touch it. Those who are born in the reservation will die in the reservation. They're allowed to live naturally with no conditioning, with all their customs, marriages, families, religions, extinct languages such as Spanish, infectious diseases, and dangerous wildlife. Bernard remembers that he left the tap running at the hotel, and while the warden is explaining the reservation, he telephones to Helmholtz to turn the tap off for him. Helmholtz promises to and informs him that the director is scheming to replace him and transfer him to Iceland. Bernard tells Lena, all she can do is shake her head and say, "Was and will make ill," she quotes. "I take a gram and I only am." They flew in a plane to a reservation and the pilot tells them that the savages are experienced enough with gas bombs to not play any tricks. Chapter 7. Walking around the reservation with the savage guide, Linnea and Bernard come across an old savage whose body was bent and emaciated to the bone. Linnea is surprised and asks why he's like that when old people like the director aren't. Bernard explains that old people in civilization are protected from disease. Their internal secretions are kept artificially balanced. Their magnesium calcium isn't allowed to drop to what it was at 30. They're given young blood transfusions, and their metabolism is kept permanently stimulated. You notice that most of them die unimpaired until 60, not being able to reach the age of the savage. Linnea and Bernard run out of soma at this point. Linnea feels indignant at the sight of women breastfeeding, but Bernard is fascinated. What a wonderfully intimate relationship, and what an intensity of feeling it must generate. I often think, why may I have missed something in not having had a mother, and perhaps you've missed something in not being a mother, Linnea. Imagine yourself sitting there with a little baby of your own. Linnea is not impressed. Linnea insists cleanliness is next to forwardliness. Bernard replies, civilization is sterilization. A young savage tells them of his mother who came from outside the reservation, Linda, and of his father, Thomas, the director. They find Linda in a worse state than the old man. 2 missing front teeth, bad colored teeth, facial lines, wrinkles, flabbiness, sagging cheeks, with purplish blotches, red veins on her nose, bloodshot eyes, and a bulged stomach. Linda stunk of not having bathed and alcohol. Linda cries at seeing the sight of civilized faces and clothes. Linda did not have access to Soma or an abortion center, and that's why she had John. She misses civilization, saying hypnopathic phrases such as, civilization is sterilization, the more stitches, the less riches, F1 belongs to F1. Linda was a beta who worked in the fertilizing room and did not have to explain to John how technology worked. She could never fit in, as other women's men would sleep with her, and she didn't know anything about savage customs such as weaving. Chapter 8. One of Linda's lovers, Pope, came to see her often. John hated all the men who came to see Linda. One afternoon, 3 savage women whipped Linda for sleeping with their men. John bit them in a rage and he himself was whipped. Later that night, Linda cries about how John ruined her life and that she would otherwise be with the director if it weren't for him. Sometime afterwards, Linda tells John about the other place, what they call outside of the Sabbath reservation, about the lovely music, the games, the food and drink, the feel and smell, the happiness, the non-monogamy, the technology, the hatcheries, and lack of despair. Lots of men came to see Linda. John got into fights with other boys as Linda soon developed a reputation, and although he didn't understand the meaning of the names they called her, he knew that they were bad names. Linda taught John how to read. It took him 15 minutes to read the title of a book called The Chemical and Bacteriological Conditioning of the Embryo, Practical Instructions for Beta Embryo Store Workers. He threw down the book in rage, calling it beastly. One day, Pope brings a book called The Complete Works of William Shakespeare. John found the words to express his rage towards Pope and plans to murder him. Pope is stabbed in his sleep but awakens to catch John. Instead of striking John, Pope praises John for his bravery and sends him off. By the time John is 15, an old man named Mitsima teaches him how to work clay and promises to teach him how to make a bow. John is denied the manhood ceremony, as the others say, not for the son of the she-dog. John and Bernard bond over how they're both always alone, because they're different from everyone else. Bernard says he was decanted differently, and John says he starved for 5 days and went out alone for one night in the mountains. John stretched out his arms on a rock like Jesus did, because he wanted to know what it was like to be crucified. Bernard had realized that Thomas and the director were one and the same, and schemes to bring John back to London. John asks if Linda can come along. Bernard hesitates, thinking of her deteriorated state, but allows her once he realized that Linda's dreadfulness can be used as a weapon against Thomas. John asks if Bernard and Lenina are married, and Bernard denies it. Chapter 9. Bernard is able to obtain permits, and then he flies off. John turns up at the rest house and is distraught at not seeing him or Lenina. He breaks into the rest house where they were staying at. He opens Liana's suitcase, being lost in its smells, until he hears her sleeping. He contemplates undressing her until he hears Bernard returning on a plane and flees. Chapter 10. At the hatchery, the director calls a meeting in the fertilizing room with all the high castle workers, looking to make a public example out of Bernard. Henry Foster tries to defend Bernard, saying that the latter does his work very well, but the director replies that just means the moral responsibility is even greater. He continues that while murder kills only one individual, unorthodoxy kills society. Bernard arrives confidently, and the director proceeds to denounce Bernard for his unorthodoxy concerning soma, sports, sex life, and behavior outside of office hours, even as a little infant. The director asks why he shouldn't exile Bernard to Iceland, and Bernard plays his trump card by bringing in Linda. "Did you think I didn't recognize him?" Linda asks indignantly. "Of course I knew you, Tompkin. I should have known you anywhere among 1,000. But perhaps you've forgotten. Don't you remember? Tompkin, you're Linda." She smiled at him and trembled. "Don't you remember?" Linda holds out her arms. "Tompkin." Someone began to titter, to give out a half-suppressed laugh. The director only managed to get out the words, "What is the meaning of this monstrous..." before Linda shouts, "Tompkin," as she wraps her arms around his neck and buries her face into his chest. "Of this monstrous practical joke," he finished. "But I'm Linda. The laughter drowned out her voice. "You made me have a baby." She screamed so loudly that made the entire room hush in uncomfortable silence. Linda calls to John. "John! John!" John appears and falls to his knees. "My father!" The uncomfortable silence was broken by laughter so hard, tears were flowing down people's cheeks. The laughter was louder than before, and this humiliation was too much for the director, causing him to cover his ears and rush out of the room. Chapter 11. All of upper caste London had heard of the director's humiliation and subsequent resignation. Linda had become sickly and addicted to soma, taking 20 grams of soma at a time. No one had any desire to see Linda, and Linda none to see them. Dr. Shaw, the doctor there, warns that taking soma shortens your lifespan and that she will die within a month or two, but mentally, she lives longer in her imagination to what our ancestors would call an eternity. Her early death didn't bother the doctor, although it would be terrible for society if people with jobs became addicted to soma and died early. It was irrelevant for Linda, as she had no job. Dr. Shaw says there's no chance for Linda to rejuvenate, but is thankful for it, as it's the first time he's ever seen a case of senility. Bernard becomes John's guardian, and the Alpha Pluses respect him because they need his approval to see John. He also gets all the women he desires. Bernard brags about the women he's able to have to Helmholtz, but Helmholtz listens in disappointment and says he's sad. Bernard swears to never speak to Helmholtz again, growing a big ego, while others talk behind his back, saying there won't be another savage to save Bernard and that his downfall was inevitable. Bernard shows John around while giving reports to Mond. John learns about embryos, high society, education, hypnopedia, soma, and conditioning. Linnea likes John, but John refuses to sleep with her, despite his sexual desires and reads Shakespeare instead. Chapter 12. Bernard tries to get John to meet important people for him, but John refuses. Bernard loses standing with high society as they feel like they have been tricked into politeness with this outcast, whose surrogate had been mistaken for a Gamma Mile surrogate. The rumors of alcohol in his surrogate surface again, and the arch community songster warns Bernard that he should mend his ways before leaving with the partygoers. Bernard, wallowing in his misery, takes Soma and sleeps. John says that Bernard is more like his old self when they first met. Because I'm unhappy again, that's why. Well, I'd rather be unhappy than have the sort of false lying happiness you were having there. I like that. When it was you the cause of it all. Refusing to come to my party and so turning them all against me. Bernard blamed John, but deep down he knew it was absurd to rely on the false friendships of those who would turn him on a nickel, but was still angry at John. He knew it was useless to try revenge against the piegoers, and settled for a small revenge against John. Bernard asks for Helmholtz's friendship again, and Helmholtz gives it as if nothing happened between them. Helmholtz himself is in trouble with society, having written an unsectioned rhyme for students about being alone. Helmholtz and John meet and get along far better than with Bernard, making him jealous. They spent their time reading Shakespeare together. Bernard has his revenge by shouting obscenities from time to time, knowing that it makes him uncomfortable. Chapter 13. Lena fantasizes about John and refuses to see other men. John hears a doorbell expecting to see Helmholtz, but instead sees Lenina. John says he wanted Lenina, but wanted to prove himself to her first. He mentions that on the Savage Reservation, men would kill lions for women, but Lena says there aren't any lions in England. John is trying to say that he wants to sacrifice to Lena, but Lena doesn't understand what lions have to do with anything. John talks about marriage, but Lena doesn't understand. Lena, hearing that John loves her, comes up to John, but John gets angry and slaps her, calling her a whore. Lena runs and hides herself in the bathroom. John gets a call and leaves. Chapter 14. John arrives at the hospital looking for his mother. The nurse is confused at John's distress at the idea of death, and is horrified at the use of the word mother. John finds his mother surrounded by Delta children. He strikes one of them upon hearing the comments. The nurse protests that she'll have him thrown out and that the children are being death conditioned. The children are led away and John sits down with his mother. Linda is too delirious to recognize John, and instead thinks she's looking at Pope. The last thing she says is, "Everyone belongs to everyone." Her face distorts and her lips turn blue. John calls for help, but she's already dead. John cries under the bed, and the nurse gets angry at John for disturbing the death condition, but decides to distract the children instead of lecturing John. John finds some Delta twin children staring at him, asking, "Is she dead?" John doesn't answer and pushes one of the twins, blocking him, and leaves. Chapter 15. John felt a surge of duty to stop the distribution of Soma, as it was poisonous to the body. While Bernard and Helmholtz look for John, he speaks of manhood and freedom before throwing pillboxes of Soma out the window. A physical alteration follows with Delta's rushing John, followed by Helmholtz, Bernard, and the police. The police subdue everyone with anesthetic water pistols. Chapter 16. Bernard, Helmholtz, and John are meeting with Mond. Mond explains that all books are banned for economic reasons and that people learning of tragedy would create social instability. Mond agrees that the high arts are good, but that's the price to pay for stability and happiness. John asks why they didn't make F1 an Alpha Double Plus, and Mond explains that they tried an island of only Alpha Pluses on Cyprus, and it ended in civil war, and Alpha won't accept Epsilon conditions. Mon reveals that it's possible for them to give Iblisons more leisure time through labor-saving devices and synthetic food, but it would rob Iblisons of their life purpose. An experiment in Ireland showed that all it would do was increase summer consumption and create unrest. Every discovery in pure science is potentially subversive. Even science must be treated as a potential enemy. Yes, even science. Mon tells them that he was once nearly sent to an island for doing real science, and that his near punishment would be theirs now. Bernard begs, but Mon has him sedated and sent away. Mon tells Helmholtz and John that it's really a reward since the most interesting people in the world live in Iceland. Mon says he himself was given the choice to continue doing pure science in exile or to become a world controller. He says that science is a public danger that cannot be allowed to undo itself. Mon says that people gave up on beauty and truth when anthrax bombs were dropped on them during the 9 Years' War. People begged for control. Mon offers Helmholtz the choice of going to the Falkland Islands. Helmholtz says he wants to check on Bernard. Chapter 17. John and Mon were now alone. John asks why there are no religious books around, and Mon says it's the same reason they don't allow Shakespeare. John asks if it isn't natural to feel like there's a God. Mon replies, one believes things because one has been conditioned to believe. Finding bad reasons for what one believes for other bad reasons, that's philosophy. People believe in God because they've been conditioned to. John complains that there is heroism and nobility in banned literature, and Mon implies that there's a need for it, because that comes as a result of unstable societies. John talks of a story where men had to win a woman's affection by holding a garden and withstanding the stings and bites of flies or mosquitoes. Mon says there's no need to suffer for women and that flies and mosquitoes were eradicated centuries ago. John says that's the problem. You just remove the trials instead of learning to put up with them. Mon says those trials were inconvenient, so we got rid of them. John says, but I like the inconvenience. Mon says we don't. We prefer to do things comfortably. But I don't want comfort. I want God. I want poetry. I want real danger. I want freedom. I want goodness. I want sin. In fact, you're claiming the right to be unhappy. Alright then. I'm claiming the right to be unhappy. Not to mention the right to grow old and ugly and impotent, the right to have syphilis and cancer, the right to have little to eat, the right to be lousy, the right to live in constant apprehension of what might happen tomorrow, the right to catch typhoid, the right to be tortured by unspeakable pains of every kind. I claim them all. You're welcome. Chapter 18. Bernard, Helmholtz, and John meet together for the last time. John asks if he would be allowed to leave with the other two to the islands, but Mon refused because he wanted to keep John around as an experiment. John tells them that he'll be going somewhere where he can be alone. John decides to live as a hermit in an abandoned lighthouse, but hates it for being too comfortable. He would prefer to live in a filthy hovel. He used what money he had received for his personal expenses to buy seeds, rations, and equipment to last him till winter. He planned to live off gardening and hunting. Some Delta Mines land workers spot him whipping himself, and soon reporters came. He kicks a reporter, and for a few days he's left alone, but he becomes a media sensation and everyone soon returns. Hundreds of people shout, "We want the whip! We want the whip!" He whips Lena, who he finds in the crowd. Then he whips himself. Then he has an soma-induced orgy. The first people who came to the lighthouse next morning found John hanging dead. In Brave New World, there is no caste mobility, either in income or looks. If your surrogate didn't get the oxygen or was spiked with alcohol, you will never become higher caste. There's some social mobility, as Bernard could use John to be accepted into some social circles, and there's definitely tiers between the lowest Alpha Plus and the World Controller. In terms of social acceptance, betas can have higher social value than alphas in the case of Bernard compared to Lenina. Betas are allowed to mingle with alphas as much as they want. People are trained to love their slavery. Everyone is conditioned to eat vegetables, cook, worship dogs, be blue pill, worship politicians, worship God, exercise, and serve the military. This is reinforced through social media, movies, television programming, and our friends and families. The only response I have to people who want to continue to follow their conditioning, which is following the mainstream, is to send them their own way. I'm here for the 1% of people who are going to listen. Talking to normies is like talking to Epsilon minus people. Bernard's treatment by the alphas should serve as a lesson as to how gaining external validation means nothing. Bernard growing a big ego after triumphing over the director is like someone getting a girlfriend after gaining status or money. It means nothing, as in it's incredibly fake. As soon as society accepted him, he abandoned his hatred for the system and lost it just as fast when his false friends couldn't gain access to John. Most people are going to act like Bernard as soon as they get a girlfriend, money, or status. They'll start following the mainstream. He is hypocritical complaining about the objectification of Lena, but as soon as he's accepted by women, he does the exact same thing. At one point, he tries to steal a kiss from the headmistress of the school. That's pretty much how these male feminists are like. If they were chads, they'd be sleeping around and objectifying women all the time. Male feminists are infamous for sexually assaulting women. Bernard is well aware of the hypnopedia and conditioning that applies to him, as he works in the field, yet he himself cannot resist despite his consciousness of it. I like how every time someone says a hypnopedic line, he recalls the frequency or repetitions. People don't learn the conditioning in real life during their sleep, but when they're consuming media, it's like they're asleep because they're unconscious of it. I feel like pinpointing exactly where all this nonsense came from every time someone speaks a proverb as if it's fact. Most conditioning is brainwashing and has no basis in society. They exist purely for marketing purposes, and I'm going to debunk all the common proverbs I've heard. I disagree with Bernard when he says people should act like adults all the time. The distinction between acting as an adult and child is a shaming tactic. It's a way to brainwash people into doing things they don't want to. You have to be a good taxpayer, you have to fight for your country, you have to do such and such. Bernard says being childish is akin to doing exactly what you want. In that case, everyone should always do what they want because that's natural and healthy, and you should never become an adult. There's a great video by Sveria. If you like coloring books or reading children's books or watching cartoons, then do it. Critics who treat adult as a term of approval instead of as a mere descriptive term cannot be adult themselves. To be concerned about being grown up, to admire the grown up, because it is grown up, to blush at the suspicion of being childish. These things are the marks of childhood and adolescence. And in childhood and adolescence, they are, in moderation, healthy symptoms. Young things ought to want to grow, but to carry on into middle life or even into early manhood, this concern about being adult is a mark of really arrested development. When I was 10, I read fairy tales in secret and would have been ashamed if I had been found doing so. Now that I am 50, I read them openly. When I became a man, I put away childish things, including the fear of childishness and the desire to be very grown up. C.S. Lewis. Approval-seeking behavior is childish, if anything. Most people's approval is worthless. It actually has anti-worth. As you listen to them and gain approval, your life gets worse. Lena, as a character, I respect for staying true to her feelings. She's been passed around by the Alpha Pluses and goes with Bernard despite his poor reputation and the protests of her friend Fanny. She never tries to appease anyone, including Bernard, by pretending to enjoy the ocean view or the Savage Reservation, and she genuinely tries to understand John's description of love. When Bernard tells her of his problems with the director, it's disappointing that she couldn't offer any support beyond hypnopathic phrases. John is brainwashed despite coming from the Savage Reservation. He doesn't understand he was still being conditioned by the people around him and the old books he read. Sacrifice in the name of love is unnatural, and being with someone you like just like that without conditions attached is natural. John believes that it's natural to believe in God, but Mon is right that he was conditioned to believe in one. The destruction of flies and mosquitoes and everything that harms humanity is natural, and having them around just so that people can experience suffering is ridiculous. You should avoid danger as much as possible. Not that I agree with Mon and the world controllers for maintaining an underclass, suppressing technology, and drugging everyone up. I relate to John's desire to destroy the system, to throw all the soma and brainwashing out. The irony is that John is the least conditioned person in the world, according to Brave New World standards, but happens to be the most brainwashed. He doesn't enjoy his life and wants to prove himself as a man to himself and to Lena, because he has childhood trauma from not being allowed to undergo his rite of manhood on a Savage Reservation and reading Shakespeare. At least the alphas and betas are enjoying life as much as possible. The old world has no wisdom to share. They were brainwashed or conditioned in their own ways. I made a video on ancient wisdom. Check it out. Helmholtz is one of the biggest NPCs in the story, having no empathy for Bernard. Yes, Bernard became arrogant during his temporary popularity, but that's to be expected after a lifetime of social and sexual rejection. Helmholtz takes for granted his privileged position as someone who is better than the average Alpha Plus physically and intellectually, having hunted women more than what the other Alpha Pluses get. The difference between Helmholtz and Bernard is that Helmholtz can choose to conform and fit in with society. Bernard's deficiencies are physical, therefore obvious with everyone. Mon is correct when pushing back against John. Banned literature really does condition people and needs to be censored. Not that I agree with the politics or the scientific basis of Brave New World, but some ideas would best be kept censored. It would be a great thing if we could eliminate every danger and annoyance to humanity, like mosquitoes and flies. The irony is that while Mon espouses a world where cruelty is eliminated in the name of science, he socially isolates John from the only friends he actually has, Bernard and Helmholtz. John, knowing that he could never relate to anyone in modern society, is forced to self-isolate, but as we can see, Mon did not exercise his power to allow John to live as a hermit, nor give him the freedom of travel to live on one of the exile islands. If we look at our own history, we have been doing everything we can to avoid danger. We invent bows, both to make hunting easy and to ensure we're not in danger in the animal's range. We invented suits of armor to minimize the effectiveness of weapons against us. We subjugate others, but we also submit to others so we're safe, and we negotiate so that there's no fighting with others, which is dangerous. Yes, we want excitement and adventure, but Having to endanger ourselves for that is unnecessary. You can play video games and get out of your system that way. You adventure by experiencing new foods, traveling, or dating, but never actually risking your life. That's a mental illness. That's for people who have trauma and have something to prove. Someone who's satisfied with their life doesn't need to prove anything to themselves or anyone else. They just want to have fun. That's why I don't mind if people enjoy prostitutes if they're unattractive. Okay, you can't find someone who likes you, just enjoy your life as much as possible. Chapter 2 is about the conditioning of Delta children into hating books and nature because they don't want Deltas to learn and want them to consume manufactured sports articles instead. That's just like how we're conditioned to fear microbes in raw food and worship sports. The repetitions that we receive are sporadic and sprinkled throughout our lives instead of as formalities, but the intent is still to condition you into behaving in certain ways. It does not take hundreds of consistent repetitions, only a few times from our peers, teachers, and parents to instill conditioning. Most people would eat raw meat if they hadn't been conditioned to cook them their whole lives, and no one would invent or care about sports if they were allowed to hunt or weren't peer pressured into it. The following chapter is about the destigmatization of sexuality. Nudity is not seen as immoral and neither is carefree sex. We hear everyone belongs to everyone, meaning there's no such thing as romantic relationships, although there are still friendships and cliques. That's the era we're living in now. Even if people still enter exclusive relationships, for people who are good looking, they can hop from relationship to relationship and sleep with almost anyone they want. So, in practical terms, they belong to anyone they deem attractive at the time. We have an underclass of Deltas, Gammons, and Ippelsons, but realistically there'd be no need for them. They just use artificial intelligence for lift operating and other menial tasks. Ippelsons would definitely be unneeded, and they would just have robots as attendants and manual labor. There's just a general lack of artificial intelligence. The world controls and alpha class would be all AI if the upper classes were willing to give up their own power in the name of great good. I agree with Mon that it's terrible that you should have to wait to be with someone you like. If they don't agree to date you right away, you should immediately move on so you can satisfy yourself by finding someone who likes you. Every highly authoritarian state always tries to break down the family because the state is supposed to come first in the hierarchy. Turning family against each other and getting people to report each other to the secret police is a running theme in totalitarian regimes. However, because of the conditioning, there is a need for secret police because people have become their own jailers and they don't even have families anymore. Words like father and mother are seen as dirty words, and reproduction has been made impersonal with surrogate units. Science is worshipped as a religion. They call it Fordism, as in they worship Henry Ford. Despite this, they still ban or neuter scientific advancement if it threatens the stability of the state. Today, the authorities use the word science to advance their agenda. No one is a true neutral devotee to science, and everyone who uses the phrase, "the science is settled," is a religious devotee, just like the acolytes of old. Just like how openly religious defiant people ignore the parts of religion they don't like, so do the people who claim to be unbiased science followers. The priests have exchanged their robes for lab coats and holy symbols for stethoscopes. Religion isn't about worshipping a deity. It's about believing something out of blind faith. When people insist that others do therapy, it's the equivalent of telling people to take soma. Therapy is a serious solution, just like soma, and it's a way for people to brush other people's problems off as a magical cure-all. Just like how Soma doesn't fix society's underlying problems, therapy doesn't either. It's a way for people to victim blame and put the onus onto the troubled person to fix themselves. Sometimes, the person is responsible for fixing themselves, but therapy has nothing to do with it, and is an absolute scam. No one considers the merit of therapy. They simply accept it as a solution due to their conditioning. If there's one book you're going to read to break your conditioning, it's Brave New World. If you can see how other people are shaped by society, you'll be able to see your own brainwashing. Just like how the characters of Brave New World are conditioned by their surroundings, so are you. You're not conditioned in one area, you're conditioned in all areas.